2 tampons mean my marriage is over. I, 29F, have been with my husband, 30M, for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase, nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that, or him, were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month. When buckling our daughter into her car seat, I noticed something slotted between the cushions. I pulled it out and saw that it was a tampon. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that has stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. I brought it to my husband's attention, and he didn't seem to understand what it was, let alone why I was holding it, until I told him where I'd found it and why I was almost certain it wasn't mine. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his coworker, Fiona. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his coworkers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband, so I figured it was entirely possible the tampon had slipped out of her purse whenever he had driven with them or offered her a ride. No big deal. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb. I don't know. I did something that I now feel kinda crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here, and in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning, this time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair, and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find. If it was my husband's coworker, why would she give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. What should I do? Update 1. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks, but I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat and the sock drawer, my husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, save for the back seat one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbences. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona. Either fucking my husband, fucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea, so she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there. Watching my husband for any changed behavior, there was none. Our house for any misplaced/foreign items, there were none. And even the girls for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that. It wasn't until my younger daughter, 2 years old, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her, but my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the 3rd or 4th day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week, though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them. So I was bewildered and kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused, like before, and asked me why I would think that. It had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room, and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room and my emotions all over the place, I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now, after I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up. Update 2. After nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my BIL agreeing to help with the install/setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered, though, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. A Ring notification had alerted me to motion at the front door while I was at work, half expecting to see a delivery person, pet, or lawn care salesman for the 15th time. You can imagine my surprise when I saw a clip of a young woman leading my daughter into the house hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. The girls were supposed to be in daycare and my husband at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the fuck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door, knew I had gotten the Ring notification, and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call, though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also a registered sex offender and a recovering addict, who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had molested them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was in our house, with our children. Suffice to say I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all and still, somehow, infinitely more disgusting knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently my SIO, fresh off another stint in rehab, had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. My husband didn't want me to know or, worse, try and keep her family, our children, away from her. So they'd been meeting in secret, often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage, in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. She spent the night on a weekend. I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. She babysat our girls on a night my husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents'. She bought the girls' clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie, and bow that my husband had promised on his life I had dressed her in myself. My husband swore this was all in my head. The tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery, like it was news to him, and telling me I was being irrational. He insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression 2 years after I'd given birth. For years after I had told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer PPD like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies, and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, After a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust but this pathetic situation, and a lot of anger. Story 2. Am I the a-hole if I buy a house on my own without including my fiancé? I, 32M, have been dating my fiancé, 29F, for 2 years, and we got engaged 7 months ago. We plan to get married in summer 2025. I love my fiancé, and she is perfect for me. We have not combined our finances yet, but plan to as soon as we get married. I make significantly more than her, but she is a surgical resident, and will start making similar to what I make in about 2 years. We live together and split the expenses where I pay 90%, which is based on how much we make. Recently, my stock portfolio has been doing great, and I decided to sell a part of my portfolio and make decent profits. I am worried about reinvesting it in stocks, and we decided to purchase a home since we plan to get married soon and start a family. My fiancé was also very excited as we would need a nicer house than our current apartment that we rent. We talked about it, and I offered to purchase the house with the cash I have sitting on the sidelines, and not take a mortgage. I feel it would be a good financial decision as the current rates are too high, and we could always get a home equity loan in future. It was all good until I told my fiancé that I would purchase the house and she does not need to contribute anything to it, as she is still paying off her student loans. Of course, I would be on the title and would have the sole ownership. My fiancé is not okay with this. She says that we will be married, and our marital home should have both of us on the title. Her friend told her that I might be protecting my assets by purchasing the home before marriage, thus making it a premarital asset. This has bothered her, and she has mentioned that to me. That was not my intention, and I do want our marriage to be successful. I have told her that I do not need to protect anything since we both would be surgeons, and both will make about the same in a few years. However, I feel it is unfair to put her name on the title as I would be paying for the house, and it is risky to put her name even before we get married. I told her that we can revisit this topic after we get married. As we have started looking for houses, we need to make the decision quickly. I understand her point that she wants to be included in ownership of the house where she would live, and we will grow as a family. However, we are looking to spend more than $1 million, and it feels wrong to give her half of my earnings and year before we get married. I need advice on what others have done in this situation, and how I can handle this sensitive situation without hurting my fiancé's feelings. Update 1. I wrote a post on a different subreddit regarding buying a house in the near future. My fiancé is not happy that I will be the sole owner of the title. She feels that she should be part owner of her own family home, but I plan to pay in cash and do not want to mix our finances until we are officially married next summer. My post was removed from the Am I the A-hole forum, but wanted to update since you guys are rock stars and so many of you gave me helpful advice. Thanks to everyone who helped me understand why she would feel more secure if her name would be on the title of her marital house, and what issues may occur in future. I realized that I was not able to think about the situation from her perspective, and I wish I would be more empathetic of her position. I still did not want to mix our finances until we get married in a year, and had to think of a middle ground. We had a long discussion about the issue this weekend. I realized that I was not able to get my point across on why it was important for us to invest that money in real estate. We sat together and I apologized to her for not communicating more clearly sooner. I told her that it was not fair for me to purchase our family home on my own, and it should be a joint decision and we should own it jointly. I tried to explain to her why it is more advantageous for us to buy real estate now, when the interest rates are higher and we could pay in cash. She was very receptive to it all. She explained why she would not feel a sense of ownership if she were not on the title of the house. She realizes that I have been the primary earner so far in our relationship, but she would graduate soon and become a surgeon, and we would be able to afford a much bigger house in a few years. I proposed that we hold on to buying our forever family home until we are married, and she starts her job. That would help us take both our commutes into account when purchasing the house. However, we should buy an apartment or condo near the city, where we both work, as an investment with the cash in hand. I would still want to be sole owner on the title, and we can amend the title once we get married. We can stay in this property until then to save on our ever-increasing rent. We could then either sell this property when we purchase our forever home, or just use it to generate rental income. Luckily, she agreed and was happy I took her feelings into consideration. I felt it was a win-win, since that was my original plan, and I was just not doing a good job explaining it to her. So, we are going to keep looking for a good investment property, and she is happy since she knows she will be included when buying our forever home. Thanks again everyone for helping me with the issue. All I had to do is call it an investment property and communicate better, and she was understanding of my view.